to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk 2020. Thanks for your patience this morning. We had a few technical challenges. If you were on early, you saw us kind of going through, but we're going to forge ahead. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thanks.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to Crop Talk for 2020. It's going to be an interesting year this year. We're going to have a few challenges on trying to get information out to producers and work with producers. So I think these webinars are going to become a little bit more frequent. I think we're going to see more people doing them, and so there'll be a good chance for a lot of people to get information this way. This series is going to run as normal. We're going to have a weekly session from now through till the end of fall, and we're going to be at the same time 9 till 10. So for this session, I thought it'd be good to get started off with looking at the weather and maybe our soil moisture conditions. And Timmy is always good to have on. He's our weather guy, and he can usually give us some real good information as to what he's been seeing out there. After that, we're going to go to a winter wheat survival video and a few comments from Ann Kirk, our industry development specialist for feed grains. And after that, I'll have a few closing comments, and then we'll go from there. As usual, if you have questions, Laurie mentioned, type them in, and we'll answer them as we're going through. I've got a couple slides before we start off here. I wanted to give a little bit of an update of what's happening out there. Truthfully, there's not a lot. It's been fairly quiet so far. I have seen the odd combine going. And talking to some of the producers that have been doing some of the combining, amazing. Some of the grain is dry, and then most of that has been the standing canola that's been taken off dry. Quality varies from field to field. Some guys are saying it's not bad. Some guys are saying it's just average. So I think that'll be one of the concerns. I haven't talked to too many producers that have tried some of the cereals yet. They've been lodged to the ground fairly good. And because of that, I think a lot of them are staying fairly wet. I have talked to a couple producers that are looking at cutting and baling some of the cereals. I think that's not a bad idea if you want to get rid of that material on top and don't think there's a lot of quality there. I think there's a lot of beef producers out there right now that would jump at the opportunity to go out and help clean up some of those fields. A little caution to some of the producers that might go out and bale it. I've done a couple nitrate tests on some of those fields, and anything that seems like it was green before we started getting the fall frost, and those would be a couple fields of oats that I've done, have shown to be a little bit high on nitrates, and so we might have to get those sent away to see what kind of levels they are. Still think the possibility of feeding it is going to be okay. It's just a matter of testing and seeing where we are. There has been some spring broadcasting happening, and I think as the ground is frozen, some guys are starting to get on the forage land and starting to get some fertilizer on. I've talked to a couple guys that are on the cusp of getting out there and seeding. They're hooked up and ready to go. One producer was telling me that once he got out there and started moving some of the straw around, that the ground was still fairly hard in places. So I think we're going to need to wait a few more days. There has been some guys out there looking at trying to clean up some of the ruts made from last fall. Most of the ones I've been talking to and seeing are using some type of pro-till type equipment to try to level the ruts out. And I guess the biggest thing we've been waiting for is the weather, and the weather to try to warm up here and get guys out in the field. And I guess that's why I thought it was a good opportunity today to get Timmy on to talk about what we can look for the weather for the next little while. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Timmy, Laurie, and we'll get into his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Lionel. Can you please confirm that you're seeing the screen okay?
You bet, Timmy.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to present at the webinar. I would go over the current conditions that we've seen this spring. I'll take a quick look at what we observed over the winter and then kind of wrap it up with the weather outlook that we may be expecting. So going ahead, let's see, just a second. Oh, there you go. The overwinter precipitation. I'm sure most folks would be aware that this past winter hasn't been particularly wet. And in terms of the total accumulated precipitation that we observed from from November up until now, actually up until just this past Sunday, most areas have actually been quite dry. There's still, the few snow on the ground at some location. But generally, in terms of the amount of moisture that we have, around this time of the year, we would have normally accumulated about 120 millimeters of precipitation. That's the water equivalent of snow. So, combined snow and rain together. But for the most part, we've received, I would say, fairly lower than normal. This next map shows what we have in terms of the percent of normal accumulated precipitation, and almost everywhere across Manitoba has actually been below normal. I think the only exception is at the PAR. So the PAR is the only location that is above 100%. It's currently at about 110% of normal. But everywhere else have been quite dry, especially just east of Riding Mountain and areas around just north of Altona. So the Red River, quite dry. And I was looking at the data. We track data at over about 124 weather stations, and only 25 of those locations actually have received above 50% of the normal precipitation. So only, I would say, about 20% of the stations have received more than half of the expected historical average. So that says something about how dry the winter has been, which I would say maybe is a good thing considering how wet the fall was. So basically, the winter was way drier than normal. In terms of temperature, though, temperature has been, I would say, all over the place a little bit, but it's been, for the most part, just slightly warmer than normal. So again, looking at the map, most locations are actually between that about 0.5 to 1 degree above normal temperature when you look at the mean temperature from November 1st last year up until April 19. The odd part would be, again, west of Riding Mountain and Duck Mountain parks, those areas, and I would say to the south around here, around Manitou and Snowflake, have been just slightly cooler than normal. And then areas around Killarney and Wawanisa have been about, 1.5 degrees warmer than normal on the average. When you compare that to where we were around this time last year, so this second map is the map of last year, and you would notice that, again, for the most part, everywhere across Agro Manitoba was cooler than normal last year. So suffice to say that this year have been drier than normal over the winter, and it's been warmer than normal on the average. Going ahead to current soil moisture, again, last fall we knew everywhere was, quite wet with the precipitation we got over in the fall. I looked at the data that we had from yesterday, looking at the top 30 centimeter soil moisture. And for the most part, again, in terms of the percent of available water within capacity, and this is simply the amount of water that the soil can hold by itself, not saturation. This is percent of available water within capacity. And most areas are actually at that 80 to 100% at the surface, except, again, just slightly north of Maurice. The surface seemed to have been quite dry, and some areas are actually still frozen again, because of the diurnal variation in temperature. So I didn't include those in this map. But again, we seem to have enough moisture across Agro Manitoba, at least to get the seed started this spring. And then when you take a look down to the entire soil profile, down to about 4 feet depth, for the most part around the central and eastern Manitoba, we do have about 80 to 100% of available water holding capacity in the soil right now. Westman and Northwest regions are mostly between 60 to 80%. So again, we are in good shape going into this growing season this year in terms of the amount of water the soil can hold and how much we have currently in the ground. You'd notice again that the surface soil condition just around the Red River seem to be drier, or at least not really dry, but not 100% yet. And I would imagine that with the crest happening at Maurice yesterday, and as the crest moves closer to Winnipeg, we would likely have maybe some of the subsurface flow or the capillary rise happening that would actually bring the surface at some of these locations around the Red River close to that 80 to 100% is what I would be expecting to see in the next little while. And this is not considering, again, the future rain that we may likely get in the next few days as well at some locations. Going over to soil temperature, the current soil temperature as we prepare for seeding. This is the chart shows the last 7 days. And as you would imagine, again, based on the air temperature, things have been quite cool, cooler than normal actually in the last few days. I know that we are currently on the up, it's likely going to keep trending upwards. And that's what you're seeing in the chart at Southwest. Again, for the temperature ranging between 0 and I would say maybe 7 degrees. The curve shows the different, like the daytime high and the nighttime low, and that's what you are seeing in the curve right now. In the central region, Altona, Austin, and some other locations, again, it's quite similar as well. Temperature ranging between that 0 at night and then during the day fluctuating based on the air temperature. When you compare this though with what we had around this time last year, I always like to compare current conditions to what we had last year to give a sense of where things were at. And last year around this time, well, just a day ahead, this was the chart from April 23rd, April 17th to 23rd last year, and many areas were actually between that 5 to 15 degrees. So last year we were quite further ahead in terms of where things in terms of the temperature in the soil. The same at the central region as well. Again, 5 to 15 centimeters for the most part last year. And it wasn't just at the central and the southwest region. The next chart shows for Interlake and Northwest, and the exact same scenario is what we are seeing playing across everywhere around Agro Manitoba, with the current soil temperature fluctuating with the daytime high ranging around that 7 degrees, and then the nighttime low at about 0 degrees. Again, with the forecast temperature in the next little while, I would expect that this trend would continue to go upwards. The current weather conditions, I thought I would just take some time to go over this page. I know a lot of producers have asked about this page in the past, and many people actually have it bookmarked on their phone or on the computer. This page updates every hour, and we are working to actually have this page update every 15 minutes, and it shows the current condition at all the locations that we monitor. I'm going to actually click on the link and go on to the live page to show you the website. Depending on the internet speed at your location, it may take anywhere between, say, 10 seconds to maybe 25, 30 seconds to load. But when it does load, it would show you, again, the location of all the weather stations that we have across the Agro Manitoba. On this left-hand side is just a little blob about what the weather network is, and a photo of the weather station. At the top here shows the tabs. And if I click on the air temperature tab, it shows the air temperature, the current air temperature that was updated just a few minutes ago. Right now it's 9:15, 9:15. If I click on this location at Shiloh, it shows that Shiloh was 0.2 at 9 o'clock. And if you click on more info, it will take you to the page on our website that actually gives you further details about the weather conditions at Shiloh right now. Again, we are working to update to update every 15 minutes. Right now it's update hourly, but we would be updating every 15 minutes, in the next little while. So going back to this tab, you can check, let's say, precipitation, if there is any precipitation overnight, the last hour right here, or since midnight. So if I click on this, yep, it's all dry this morning, but then if there were to be some precipitation since midnight, it would show up right here. Same for wind speed and direction. It shows you, what the wind speed is at various location. Again, you can zoom into specific location of interest, and if you click on an arrow, it shows you more information. It shows the average wind speed at Starbuck right now is about 19 kilometers an hour, and it's gusting, that's the maximum wind speed, at 21 kilometers an hour. So basically, again, this page shows very good information. I know around this time of the year, when we are preparing for seeding, one of the main things that most producers will be looking at would be the soil temperature. And again, this page shows you the soil temperature at the various location. It's not surprising that to the west it seemed to be warmer. Actually, yesterday Regina got up to, I think, about 23 or 24 degrees. Not that we are jealous of that, because we would get to about 13, 14, I would say, in East Manitoba today, and then we should have the upward trends in the next little while. But again, yesterday the Western Manitoba was much warmer than Eastern Manitoba, so it also translates into what we are seeing in terms of soil temperature. And the neat thing is that although for seeding, we are mainly concerned about the soil temperature at the seeding depth, top 1 inch or 2 inches, which is what the 5 centimeter depth provides. But I can click on the 20 centimeter depth, and again, it shows what's happening at that depth at 20 centimeters across Agro Manitoba. Soil moisture is another important aspect that I know a lot of folks are looking at right now. I would caution, though, with soil moisture that it provides what we call the volumetric water content. And volumetric water content varies depending on the texture of your soil. So for people that are farming in the Red River, like heavy clay soil, the maximum you would expect to have in clay soils would be about 60% of volumetric water content. So when you see, Maurice at 43, that's actually pretty much close to saturation because it's quite high. However, if you are in sandy soil, let's say Shiloh, for instance, Shiloh is a sandy location. The maximum the location would ever get to would be about 30%. So when you see 12%, it's not 12%, it's not 12 out of 100, it's simply 12 out of the maximum that particular soil can hold. One of the work that we are doing on the background with the IT folks is also to really translate the numbers you are seeing here into the actual water holding capacity, so that instead of seeing the volumetric water content, you would be seeing the percentage of water holding capacity and barometric pressure for those that are interested in that as well. So basically, this page gives you what you need to know in terms of the current condition. Very soon, when folks are ready to spray, wind speed and direction would be a major factor to consider. And I always say that, the weather apps are really great because they provide information based on models, and the closer you are to the time, the better the model prediction. However, stations provide current observation. So if you want to know what's happening right now, this is where I would suggest you go. Okay, so going back to the presentation, again, for folks that are looking for current conditions, this is the web link to this page. An easier way to get there is also to just on Google, if you type in Manitoba current weather viewer, it would likely get you to this page. Beyond soil temperature and soil moisture, though, I always say for information purposes, it's always good to also understand the risk related to spring frost. So this this map shows you the average date of the last spring frost, and it's compiled based of about 50 years of data that we collected from Environment Canada stations and interpolated values. So basically, again, this shows that on the average that you would expect that the last spring frost will be later than the values given on this map. So average date means 1 in every 2 years. You would expect it to be later than the date given. For instance, at Arbog, it's on May 26th is the average date for the last spring frost at Arbog. So 1 in every 2 years, you would expect that it will be later than this date given. The 25% risk is 1 in every 4 years. And then the 10% risk, oh yeah, it's June 1st at Arbog. And then the 10% risk is the 1 in 10 years, what you would expect. And it occurs at June 5. So 1 in every 10 years, you would expect that you would have a late frost later than June 5 in the spring. So I thought I would quickly, and I like doing this because, again, I like to look at how the probability risk matches with what we are seeing, on the ground. So this table shows the last spring frost and in the last 10 years at Arbog. And, based on the map, the historical map using 50 years worth of data, it shows that the last spring frost should occur later than May 26. And that's pretty much what we saw in the last 10 years. 5 of the last 10 years was up before May 26th. 2011 was exactly on May 26th, and then we had another 4 years after that. For the 25% risk, that is 1 in every 4 years. Again, we saw 8 of the last 10 years. The risk, the last spring frost occurring before June 1st, and then only 2 years occurred after June 1st. And then the 10% risk, 1 in every 10 years, you'd expect it to happen later than June 5, and that's what we saw at Arbog, and it actually occurred last year. The same thing for Altoona. 4 out of the last 10 years, we saw that the last spring frost occurred before the May 15th, which is the average date at Altoona. Again, 8 out of 10 years for the 25% risk, and then 9 out of the last 10 years we had the 10% risk. The last spring frost occurring before the 10% risk. So again, it really shows that the probability that we have on this map is quite accurate in terms of what we would see. And finally, on spring frost, I decided to put, the Altoona and Arbog dates side by side. And as a generic rule of thumb, the further north you go, the later the occurrence of your last spring frost in most years. And in the last 10 years, Altoona ranged from April 26 in 2012, all the way to May 30th. However, Arbog ranged from May 13th to June 12th. And if you take a look at this table, in almost every year, Altoona had, an earlier last date for spring frost compared to Arbog, and that makes sense, again, going by the map that this is showing. Now, this wouldn't really, there's nothing we can do about frost. It's something I like to say, but it's always good to have this information so that you have a better understanding of the risk associated with your location. Now, I'll move ahead quickly to what to expect in the next little while in terms of temperature. But before I get to what to expect, again, I'd like to go back to last year's prediction. So last year's prediction for temperature, I used Environment Canada's model prediction over the next 3 months. So the spring prediction last year in 2019, April, May, June, was that many areas around Agro Manitoba would be slightly warmer than normal. So it's a very weak probability, 40 to 50% probability that would be warmer than normal. However, what we saw last year, again, from April 1st to June 30th, was actually the slight opposite, in which we were cooler than normal across Agro Manitoba. I'm sure most folks would remember, especially in May. Actually, April was warmer than normal, really warm last year in 2019. But May and June were way cooler than normal, and I think at some locations we had a growing degree day accumulation of about 75% of normal sometime in June. So basically, I always say, this forecast, especially the long range forecast, it's good to have information, but again, I wouldn't bet on them necessarily. So going to what, again, the prediction is for this year, what to expect in terms of temperature. This is actually one of the few times I've seen the prediction that we would be cooler than normal in the spring in the last little while. So, and then the probability around central Manitoba actually seemed to be slightly high, so 50 to 60% chance that we would be slightly cooler than normal this spring, April, May, June. And then for the rest, East Manitoba and then West Man, I think the probability is lower, just 40 to 50% chance that it would be lower than normal in terms of temperature over the next 3 months. And then going into the next 6 months, July to September, there seems to be equal probability that we may be at normal or that we would be slightly above or below normal. So having nothing here simply means that there is equal chance of being above, being below, or being at normal. Again, this maps doesn't mean that, especially for the next little while, it doesn't mean that every day in the next 3 months that we would be below normal. There would be days where we would be well above normal and days when we would be below normal. Actually, in the last 3 weeks or so in April, we've been mostly below normal air temperature. So this seems to be holding up quite okay for now. We would see in the next few months, in the next couple of months, if we continue in that trend. Hopefully things warms up so that again we can get the seeds going. So moving ahead to precipitation, what to expect in terms of precipitation. Again, I like to look back to last year's prediction. Last year's prediction, there wasn't really anything because again, the models were showing equal probability of being either at normal or slightly above or slightly below normal. But what we observed around that same period last year was the fact that many areas in western Manitoba was actually around that normal precipitation. But again, in Interlake and Northwest, as many folks would remember, were way below normal. Actually, less than 50% of historical precipitation was what the Interlake and Northwest areas received last year. And going into this year, actually just slightly north of Agro Manitoba, there is a 40 to 50% probability that those areas, north of Agro Manitoba would be wetter than normal. But around here, most areas, it's actually, again, equal probability. There's equal chance of being below normal or above normal or at normal precipitation. And I don't have any new news, I should say, for the longer range prediction for July, August, September. It's also quite similar. And I always like to say that for precipitation, again, it's very hard to predict. It's one of those very dynamic weather variables that we monitor. So, and there are a lot of localized systems that also impact what gets developed. So it's always difficult to get it right. And I understand why the models wouldn't really show anything in terms of the significant probability of occurrence. However, as we've seen in the last number of years, it seems that being above normal or below normal or at normal doesn't really it isn't the most important thing. I think the most important thing is the timing of the precipitation. Last fall we saw, last September, over 400% of normal precipitation at some locations. However, the precipitation came, too little, too late. And then it wasn't really useful for the crops. In fact, it actually hampered harvesting operations. So it isn't really about how much we have at the end of the season in terms of total accumulation. I think the most important thing is when the precipitation occurs and how much you receive. And in wrapping things up, just this last slide here, within the program here at Manitoba Agriculture, again, we've extended the number of weather stations we had, over the last 5-6 years or so. Last year, we did not build any new station, but we replaced some new stations, some old stations, and upgraded many stations. This year, 2020, we are planning to build new stations. Hopefully, again, depending on what the advisory is, based on the health officials and COVID-19 situation, we are planning to fill in some gaps that we've identified. And so, yeah, hopefully we are able to get out there to install new stations this year. And finally, I would also like to welcome Alison Sass Alison Sass is the new AgMed specialist that will be taking over my position, and I am moving into agricultural systems modeler. So part of my new role would be to use the data from these weather stations to create value-added products. So yeah, welcome to Alison Sass, and thank you everyone for joining. I'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay, thanks, Timmy. Actually, there is a couple questions here. One of the first ones was you mentioned that the system was hopefully going to be moving to updating every 15 minutes. How long do you think before that'll happen?
I'm expecting that once we have the uptake in temperature, so basically the only limitation we have right now is the fact that in cooler seasons, like over the winter, the batteries don't really last as long because all our stations run on solar panel. So now that we are having longer days and temperatures seem to be, ticking towards, being warmer, we would likely have the switch. I'm expecting in the next 1 week, by May 1st, I would imagine we would make the switch.
Okay, and how about history on, I guess the question kind of is probably more towards spraying. What type of history is on the map so you could go back to, say back to your spraying in June and you want to go back to the last week of May, would you be able to get that kind of information?
Right now, you can't get that kind of information as a map on the current weather viewer, because the current weather viewer only shows what's happening in the last hour or the last 15 minutes when we make the change. However, there is a new system that we have been designing. It's still in just at the, I would say, last phase of getting through the approval and a few other kind of oops. But yeah, we are working on a system where you can go back, not just even just the last month, you can go back as far back as 10 years, or as far back as the station was established. I would say some stations were only installed, in the last few years. So we are putting almost all our data on a link. It's actually an Aquarius. We call Aquatic Informatics is what the software is called. So we would be using Aquarius to upload most of those, and then the public can actually select any location of interest, select any parameter of interest. So let's say wind speed, and then it would show them in a chart what the wind speed had been over the last number of years. So we don't have the system right now, but it's something we are developing.
Okay, are the frost maps available on the MAFRE website?
Yes, I believe they are available on our website. I can quickly take a look. It's likely that we had removed the spring frost last fall and put the first fall frost maps with what is likely there. I would check again and look, but I would suggest folks to check the current conditions weather page and they would find it there. If it's not there right now, I can promise to upload it by end of workday tomorrow at the latest.
Okay, and one last question. Did you do any of the winter wheat site tests this past winter for temperature?
Yes, we did. We install winter wheat soil temperature probes, and those ones are installed actually at an inch depth, and we have the information on our website. I can quickly show the information on the website, if that's okay. So the current conditions page is where most of our information is, and then there is the current winter wheat soil temperature at the 4 locations that we have. And so if folks open that, it shows the chart over the last, again, 7 days at those 4 locations, Melita, Carberry, Roblin, and Abog.
Okay, well, that's great, Timmy. That's some real good information, and it actually, the question brings us to our next presenter. So I don't see any other questions. So thanks again, Timmy, for being on, and always good information.
Okay, thank you.
So our next presenter is going to be Ann Kirk, and she's going to talk to us about the winter wheat and how to see if winter wheat has survived the winter, and a little bit of a talk on a video that she did. So I'm going to get Lori to turn the screen over to Ann.
Great, thanks. Just getting this ready here. So Réjean Picard and I made a video last week looking at winter wheat stand assessment to assess the survivability after the winter. You know, just because of how things are going this year, we thought it'd be a good idea to start, you know, doing some alternative forms of extension. So I'm going to play the video that we made last week. For some background information, I hope that the video and audio may not work well, just sharing it on the screen, but we'll see how that goes. And after I'll take some questions and then describe a little bit about what we did.
I'm Anne Kirk, cereal specialist with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. I'm out here in a field of winter cereals. It's mid-April, and now's a great time to take a look at our winter cereals and see how well they've survived the winter. So this is a fall rye here, and we have winter wheat beside us, and they were both planted in mid-September. Fall rye and winter wheat will break dormancy and start to actively grow once temperatures are consistently above zero. Right now, we haven't had a string of warm days and warm nights, and the crops haven't broken dormancy yet. So I'd recommend taking plant samples from a variety of spots in the field. So taking some samples from areas where the stubble is tall, you know there's good snow cover and you'd expect good winter survival, and also from some areas where snow cover may not have been as good just due to having some poor stubble or various other reasons. So what we're going to do is just take some plants out of the field. So I'm going to bring these plants inside, and Réjean Picard, Farm Production Extension Specialist, will show you how to clean these plants off, trim them up, and assess to see how well the crown has survived the winter.
Okay, so now we're off the field. So we got some samples with us that we dug up from the field, and we want to show you how to prepare your seedlings, your samples, so that you can within a day or two be able to evaluate how those seedlings are able to recover from the winter, how they've survived, and how they would be able to recover. So again, so we've got some dirt around. This sample is already still froze up a little bit. So again, but once you bring it into your office somewhere, let it thaw out and warm up, and then clean out the dirt, which we've already done here. And so what we're left with here is some seedlings like this. And what we want to do, we want to keep just the crown part of that seedling. So we would cut out the roots and also some of the shoots, so most of the shoot about an inch. So we're left with about an inch, which is basically the crown here from the roots to where the shoots begin. So what we would do with that, we would simply rinse that off, wash that off, so we have a clean sample. And then we would put that either in a Petri dish, which I have here already, or if you want to wrap it in a moist towel and put it into a plastic bag to keep it moist for at least a few hours to a couple of days. And then you'll be able to see here what I've done here. I've already done a couple of samples, and this sample is a better, more established fall rice sample that I took yesterday. And already we can see within a day, within a few hours, where I cut off the shoot here, we can see new regrowth already happening. So that's a good sign here. We have a healthy crown, and we can also see even some new roots developing here at the crown. And that's the key here to see and to expect regrowth, is that crown is healthy and well, and it should put out some new shoots and new roots. This particular one here on this side, planted a little bit later. I don't have the specific dates, but this one here we can see still not as well developed of a crown, but still some roots, some shoot developing. Might take a little bit longer for roots to show, but again, still looks like we've got some potential for regrowth here as well.
Regardless of how the crop looks at this time of year, it's important to actually get out and assess plant stand once the crop is actively growing, and you have a better idea of how the crop looks at that point. It's a great idea to assess the survival and how well your crop looks now, say in mid-April, so you can start to make some decisions about spring fertility and also weed control.
Okay, so that was the winter wheat video that Réjean and I put together last week. So throughout the season for winter wheat, we will be putting together some management and like diagnostic type videos for information on the specific crop, and we'll be looking for other ideas as well throughout the summer. So yeah, we put this together just just to give people an idea of how to actually assess stands for survival. And one of the key things is that, you know, at this time of year, just by looking at the plant, if it's green or brown, it doesn't necessarily mean that the plant has survived or that it didn't survive the winter. So it is important to dig up those plants and actually see what the crown looks like. So in the next, you know, it's going to be warming up now, so we will start to see some active winter wheat growth. And at that point, we can we'll be talking more about winter wheat plant stand and when to assess and how to assess to see if that plant stand should be reseeded. Based on the information that Timmy collected over the winter at the four diversification centers, we aren't expecting a lot of winter kill. The temperatures didn't dip below the time when we would expect winter kill and winter wheat, at least at those 4 locations. So we are expecting to see a good winter wheat stand this year throughout the province. So does anyone have any questions about winter wheat stand assessment or survival over winter?
Okay, yeah, there is a couple of questions here, Anne. One question that came through was, what is an adequate stand for winter wheat crop?
So optimum stand would be about 20 to 30 plants per square feet. But we do know that winter wheat has a huge ability to actually compensate for lower plant stands by tillering. So research has shown that a plant stand of say 7 to 8 plants per square feet could yield about 70 to 80% of normal. So when we are actually assessing plant stand to see, you know, what's out there, if the producer is willing to take that risk or that lower yield, then yeah, we can dip down to some pretty low plant stands. It is important also to assess, like, the evenness in the field is really important. So, you know, winter wheat is very hard to assess just because we might see some areas of the field where there wasn't a lot of snow catch or the plant didn't do a lot of growth before freezing in the fall, where we might see some thinner plant stands. So, you know, it is important to assess all areas of the field and then decide, you know, if just certain areas need to be reseeded, or if the whole field might be okay. You know, if it is, say, 7 and up plants per square feet. Yvonne Lawley did quite a bit of research over the past few years looking at, you know, seeding plant stand and also seeding time for winter wheat. And she found that in her research that even late seeded winter wheat, if the plant stand ranged from about 9 to 19 plants per square feet, they'd reach about 70 to 80% of that maximum yield as well. So that's with some later seeded winter wheat. So there is quite a range possible.
Okay, and this is, I think, a follow-up to that one then. How long do I wait before I make that decision? I guess it's whether to, you know, leave the stand or work it up. I'm probably looking, I guess, at a date, or, you know, how long do I wait, or do I make the decision early or later?
I think it's important to just give the wheat enough time to actually recover. So, you know, in some years we might not actually see that winter wheat actively growing until you know, early to mid-May. So you wouldn't really be able to make, depending on the temperature in the spring, you might not be able to make that decision until early to late May. And I think leaving it as long as you feel comfortable before deciding to work that crop up and reseed it or seed another, say, spring wheat directly into that winter wheat. So I think waiting, you know, until about the middle of May, if possible, would be realistic in certain years.
Yeah, and I guess if you start to notice plants actually starting to rot or die off, that would be kind of a giveaway message too, I guess there.
Yeah, and we might, depending on the year, you might notice a lot earlier that, you know, the plants aren't coming back from the winter. So that's why I think it is good to get out early and actually, just like Rejan was saying, dig up some plants, wash off the crown, and then put those in a paper towel in a warm area just to see what you're expecting. Because then, you know, although that's not foolproof and we do still have to wait for the crop to start actively growing, it is a good way to start thinking about that decision and if you're going to have to decide if you should be reseeding or not.
Okay, and I've got John Hurd on the line here. John, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I hear you as well. So I was talking with John yesterday and starting to get some questions regarding fertilizing and of winter crops, and thought it'd be maybe good if John can maybe make a few comments regarding, I guess, when is our critical time, I guess, in getting that fertilizer on. So if you can start with some of those comments, and I think I got another question for you that came in as well. So.
Oh, okay. Well, of course, we like to have it on early. And in regards to Anne's comment, in years when we have stress on the plant and we have thin stands, we know that early nitrogen helps encourage more tillering to fill those stands in. But it doesn't sound like they're seeing that type of stress out there. We do like to have it on early, but a lot of farmers now put some or a portion of their nitrogen on in the fall, and that buys them time. So it isn't as critical to have it out. But if there wasn't any nitrogen supplemented in the fall, then we'd like to have it on early here. We did studies in the past and we went as late as mid-May, but that was really dependent on having some nitrogen there in the fall. So I would say as soon as the ground is fit to be out there is the time to pull the trigger. The rates that we're suggesting for winter wheat and fall rye are considerable with nitrogen. I went back, we have old but good research on winter wheat. And, if we have low nitrogen carryover, our recommendation's about 150 pounds of nitrogen. And if we've got medium soil test levels, it's 120 pounds. With rye, we have new but sparse research, and it's suggesting for typical yields of an open pollinated rye would be calling for about 85 pounds of nitrogen. And if it was a hybrid rye, which is higher yield potential, maybe 80 bushels per acre, then we'd be at 100 pounds of nitrogen. So we do have some guidelines for people to go by.
Okay, and one question that I got the other day was, being that the ground is frozen and are still fairly hard in most places, and we actually received some snow just the other day. Should I be looking at what types of, I guess, nitrogen should I be looking at putting on, or does it make a difference, or what's your opinion on that?
I think what's become largely the standard is dribbled 28% UAN nitrogen, and that works very well. It's just the way we put it on as a dribble, and as UAN, it's already got some built-in protection against volatilization losses. So that's good. But if we're in a period where it looks like it's going to be warm, windy, and not any rain coming, then they may want to put a urease inhibitor like agrotane with it. The other option is broadcast urea, but higher risk of losses. So again, if there's no rain in the forecast and it's warming and windy, then the agrotane type of treatment would be warranted.
Okay, and this is going to be a little off topic of winter wheat, but I've been talking to people regarding getting ruts from last spring, or last fall, I should say, and any comments to you about would you have on going and just filling in those ruts with dirt, or regarding compaction, regarding seed bed development? Any comments regarding that?
I'm old-fashioned on the tillage thing, and so my comments are don't just fill the ruts in, make sure you're preparing a seed bed. If we just fill ruts in with dry soil, then we've made ourselves a droughty seed bed. So we actually need to have a seed bed there, and hopefully we'll get some moisture once we filled those in sufficient that we can get good germination. But yeah, just filling it in with dry soil. As Timmy said, we haven't had a lot of spring moisture, so we've got lots of water in the soil, but the surface is starting to dry out.
Okay, well, good. Thanks, John, for those comments, and thanks, Anne and Rajan for doing that video. And just a to let everybody know that video will be put up on YouTube. So if you go to the Manitoba Ag site and go to our YouTube, you'll be able to see that video as well. And it'll probably show up a lot better on the video, and there's not as much buffering. So definitely go to take a look at that. What I'm going to do now is just go through a few more slides to end off the day here. I wanted to remind everybody that the new field crop protection guides are out for 2020. They're $10. Available in most offices. I guess with the way things have been going, probably call ahead would be the best, that you're coming in for one, and then somebody make sure that the books would be available for you to pick up. I talked a bit about the YouTube, but the seasonal crop reports, the information that Timmy was giving today, are all on our website. You could also get reports emailed to you. Pretty soon we'll be starting the crop report, so that'll be done on a weekly basis. There's also growing conditions. John Gavloski has the insects and disease updates, along with Dave Kaminsky and Tammy Jones for the weeds. The weather updates, as Timmy mentioned, are all there. So if you want to sign up for those, go to our Manitoba Ag website, click on online resources, and then you just click on the reports and newsletters that you would like to be receive, and they'll be you'll be on the account to get them. Also, follow the Manitoba Ag Twitter account. There's going to be updates on there as we go through the season. YouTube I've mentioned already, and Crop Chatter is another way of getting some good information. So if you go up to cropchatter.com, there's always some good questions and answers being going on there. The farm production extension specialists, these are the people in the province that are working with producers and industry people, and if you got questions or concerns or need to know an answer, give any of us a call. Our cell numbers are there, and if we don't know the answer off the top of our head, we'll definitely get back to you. There's also the 1-844-769-6224 toll-free number, and Lori is usually handling that number, so she'd be able to get a hold of most of the people. And we also have our ag.gov.mb.c email account, so if you're got a question, you can also send emails and they'll be answered. For those of you that are certified crop advisors or CEUs, if you're wanting your credits, there's Lori's email address, so definitely contact her. And I guess that'll be it for this week. So join us next week. April the 29th is going to be where we'll have probably looking at guys seeding by then. So with that, I don't think there's any other questions. So thanks.
I do have one, Lionel.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yep. So I have a question here. Are those fall rye nitrate rates based on low soil nitrate or medium?
I think John is still on. John, can you answer that?
Yeah, those are based on an average of about 30 pounds nitrogen carryover. So I guess if the grower is looking for a good thumb rule to use, if he's growing open pollinated rye, we look at needing 1.9 pounds of nitrogen per bushel of yield they expect. The hybrid ryes are more efficient. They only need 1.6 pounds of nitrogen per bushel, but those nitrogen amounts are soil plus fertilizer. So it's best if they have a handle on what the soil nitrogen level would be. Although the hybrid rye is more efficient, the yield potential is 25% higher. So actual nitrogen rates are not going to be a whole lot different. You just expect more yield when you put that same rate of nitrogen on the hybrid.
Great. Thanks, John. And again, I'd like to thank all the other presenters today, and hope to see everybody again next week. Thanks, Laurie.